At 2:17 in the morning, the phone is not really a phone anymore. It is evidence. It glows in the dark beside your face while the rest of the room sits still, and you scroll through the same conversation you have already read too many times. The same words, the same pause before the last reply, the same sentence that used to sound harmless before everything after it changed its meaning. You are not typing. You are not calling. You are not even sure what you are looking for, but your eyes keep returning to the scene, as if one more reading will reveal the exact second where the person you trusted became the person who hurt you. There is no new information in the thread. You know that. You know the date. You know the tone. You know the part where they were warm, and the part where they became distant, and the part where you started explaining their distance to yourself in ways that protected them more than you. You know the message that still makes your stomach tighten. You know the silence after it. But the mind keeps acting as if the answer is hidden somewhere between two lines. Maybe inside a punctuation mark. Maybe in the delay between replies. Maybe in the version of you who did not yet understand what was coming. This is one of the strangest things about being hurt by someone. The person may be gone from your life, or mostly gone, or technically still there, but emotionally unreachable. And yet, they remain intensely present inside the mind. You see them while making coffee. You hear their voice while trying to work. You imagine what you should have said while standing in a grocery aisle under fluorescent lights. You replay the argument while brushing your teeth. You wake up and feel the old question waiting before the day has even begun. People often call this love. They say if I cannot stop thinking about them, maybe they mattered more than I want to admit. Maybe there is unfinished energy. Maybe the connection was different. Maybe some part of me still knows something. But obsessive thought is not proof of destiny. It is not proof that the person was rare. It is not proof that the relationship was deeper than all others. Sometimes the mind returns to a person, not because that person was home, but because that person became the site of an injury. The mind still does not know how to organize. A wound is not always loud when it happens. Sometimes it is a sentence said calmly. Sometimes it is being replaced without warning. Sometimes it is discovering that the tenderness was not as solid as it felt. Sometimes it is being lied to by someone whose face your nervous system had classified as safe. Sometimes it is being discarded by someone who once acted like you were necessary. And after that, the mind begins its investigation. It asks why. Then it asks why again in a different language. Why did they do that? Why did I not see it? Which part was real? Which part was performance? Did they ever care? Did I imagine the closeness? Was I too much? Was I not enough? Could I have prevented it? Did they know they were hurting me? Are they thinking about it too? How can they be calm while I am still standing in the wreckage? Rumination looks like thinking, but it often does not behave like thinking. Susan Nolan Huxama's work on rumination helped describe a pattern of repetitive focus on distress, causes, and consequences, without necessarily moving toward resolution. It is not the same as reflection. Reflection can widen the room. Rumination keeps walking down the same hallway, opening the same door, finding the same darkness, and then returning to the beginning, because the darkness still feels unfinished. This is why you can spend hours thinking about someone and understand less than when you began. The thoughts become circular. They do not add new information. They add heat. They make the person larger, not clearer. They make the wound more familiar, not more healed. The mind mistakes repetition for progress because repetition feels active. It feels like doing something. It feels better than the helplessness of admitting that there may be no answer from them that would undo what happened. And helplessness is the center. Not love, not obsession in the romantic sense, not some mystical proof that the two of you are bound. The real center is often helplessness. There was a moment when reality changed and you could not control it. Someone withdrew, lied, betrayed, disappeared, humiliated you, chose someone else, rewrote the story, or revealed a face you could not reconcile with the face you loved. The mind returns because it wants to find the lever it missed. It wants the moment before the fall. It wants the sign it should have noticed. It wants the sentence that would have stopped them. It wants the version of you who would have left earlier, spoken sharper, cared less, seen more, needed nothing. It wants to rescue the self that was still trusting when trust was already becoming dangerous. That is why obsessive thoughts can feel like an investigation at a crime scene. You revisit the scene not because you enjoy blood on the floor, but because something in you believes the evidence will give you back control. If you can understand exactly why it happened, maybe it will stop being unbearable. If you can see the pattern, maybe you will never be fooled again. If you can decide whether they were cruel, confused, wounded, selfish, avoidant, manipulative, afraid, or simply indifferent, maybe your body will finally release its grip. But the mind has a terrible habit. When an answer does not arrive, it does not always stop looking. It often searches harder. Attachment theory helps explain why this becomes so powerful. John Bowlby described attachment as a system designed to keep us close to figures of safety. Mary Ainsworth later showed that people can develop different patterns of attachment depending on how care, closeness, and separation were experienced. When the attachment system is calm, the world feels more manageable. When the attachment system is threatened, the mind can become intensely focused on the person who holds the threat. This is why someone who hurt you may occupy more mental space than someone who treated you gently. The nervous system is not democratic. It does not give attention according to moral deserving. It gives attention according to unresolved threat. A kind person who is stable may not activate the alarm. A person who is warm one day and cold the next can become a flashing red light in the brain. You do not keep thinking because they were better. You keep thinking because your safety system could not predict them. With attachment anxiety especially, uncertainty becomes a trap. Silence does not feel like silence. It feels like danger. Distance does not feel like distance. It feels like abandonment, beginning again. A delayed reply becomes a weather system inside the body. The mind starts scanning for signs, changes, clues, hidden meanings. It becomes an emotional detective because the attachment system believes survival depends on knowing whether the bond is safe. Then, if the person hurts you, the bond does not simply turn off. It may become louder. The person who caused the pain is also the person your mind wants comfort from. The same face becomes threat and medicine. The same voice becomes wound and bandage. This creates a horrible confusion inside the body. The person who made you feel unsafe is also the person your nervous system still tries to reach for in order to feel safe again. That confusion can look like longing. But sometimes it is not longing for the person as they are. It is longing for the nervous system to return to the moment before the injury. The mind wants the original image restored. It wants the person to become the person they were before the betrayal, before the coldness, before the humiliation, before the final message. It wants reality to apologize by becoming innocent again. This is why closure becomes so seductive. You imagine one conversation where everything finally makes sense. They admit what they did. They explain why they changed. They say you were not crazy. They say they did care. They say the version of you who loved them was not foolish. They hand you a clean ending, and your body finally exhales. But often, the person who wounded you is not capable of giving the kind of explanation that would heal the wound. And sometimes the explanation exists, but it still does not satisfy the part of you that wants the past to become different. The Zeigarnik Effect offers another lens. Bluma Zeigarnik observed that unfinished or interrupted tasks tend to remain more active in memory than completed ones. The mind holds on to what has not been closed. A relationship that ends cleanly may hurt, but it can eventually become a chapter. A relationship that ends through betrayal, ambiguity, disappearance, manipulation, or emotional contradiction becomes something else. It becomes an unfinished task inside the nervous system. No apology, no final conversation, no honest explanation, no moment where the facts line up neatly, no ending that feels emotionally proportional to what was lost. So the mind keeps the file open. It reopens it while you are trying to sleep. It reopens it when a song comes on. It reopens it when someone says their name. It reopens it when a new person shows kindness and some frightened part of you asks whether kindness is only the beginning of another trap. The unfinished story becomes sticky, not because it is beautiful, but because it is unresolved. A clean wound can scar. An open wound keeps asking for attention. And when the wound involves contradiction, the mind suffers even more. Leon Festinger's idea of cognitive dissonance describes the discomfort of holding conflicting beliefs or experiences at the same time. Someone who hurt you often leaves behind a dissonance that is hard to live with. They loved me. They used me. They were kind. They were cruel. They promised. They vanished. I am intelligent. I ignored the signs. I am worthy of respect. I accepted disrespect. I trusted my perception. My perception failed me. The mind hates these contradictions. It tries to reduce them. It wants one clean story. They were evil from the beginning, or they were good but wounded, or I was the problem, or none of it mattered, or all of it mattered too much. Each story reduces some pain but creates another kind. If they were evil from the beginning, then why did love feel real? If they were good but wounded, then why did they choose to hurt you? If you were the problem, then maybe there is control. But the control comes with self-hatred. If none of it mattered, then why are you still bleeding? So the mind keeps rearranging the facts. It builds one version in the morning and destroys it at night. It defends them, then prosecutes them. It misses them, then despises them. It remembers the tenderness, then remembers the cruelty, then tries to decide which memory is the true one. But both may be true. That is what makes it unbearable. The same person can contain the hand you held and the hand that pushed you under. This is one of the reasons obsessive thought becomes so consuming. You're not only thinking about them, You're trying to repair a broken map of reality. Before them, you may have believed certain things, that people who love you will not humiliate you, that promises mean something, that your intuition can protect you, that if someone is gentle in private, they will not become careless with your pain later. Then the event happens, and the map tears. Afterward, you do not only miss the person, you miss the world where the person made sense. This is why betrayal is so different from ordinary loss. Ordinary loss says, something loved is gone. Betrayal says, something loved was not what you thought while you were loving it. That second pain enters the past and changes the color of memory. Moments that once comforted you become suspicious. You revisit them not only to remember, but to audit them. Was that real? Did they mean it? Were they already leaving? Was I being studied, used, tolerated, compared, replaced? Jennifer Freed's concept of betrayal trauma is useful here, especially when the person who hurt you was someone you depended on emotionally, socially, financially, or psychologically. Betrayal trauma is not only about the bad act itself, it is about harm from someone who was supposed to be safe. The injury lands inside the system that was responsible for trust. So after the harm, you may not only distrust them, you may distrust yourself for trusting them. That self-distrust is often what keeps the obsession alive. The mind returns not simply to ask, why did they do this? It returns to ask, why did I let them close? Why did I believe them? Why did I explain away the signs? Why did I stay? Why did I become someone I do not recognize? The person who hurt you becomes the symbol of a deeper terror. Maybe I cannot protect myself. Maybe I do not know what love is. Maybe my own longing can make me blind. That terror is harder to release than the person, because if you stop thinking about them, you may have to face the deeper wound without distraction. The mind would rather analyze their behavior for the 1,000th time than sit quietly with the possibility that trust itself now feels dangerous. There is also the pain of humiliation. Not public humiliation necessarily, though it can be that too. A private humiliation. The humiliation of having cared more. The humiliation of having believed. The humiliation of rereading your own messages and seeing tenderness that now feels exposed. You look back at yourself being open, patient, hopeful, forgiving, and you feel a strange anger at that earlier version of you. How could you not know? How could you be so soft? How could you give them that much? But that earlier self was not stupid. That earlier self was living with the information available at the time. It may have been hopeful. It may have been lonely. It may have been attached. It may have been ignoring signs, yes. But it was also trying to love, trust, repair, and make meaning. After harm, the mind often becomes cruel to the self that did not know. It treats innocence as evidence of failure. This is another reason the person remains in your head. As long as you keep studying them, you do not have to grieve the version of you who was wounded. You can stay in analysis. Analysis feels sharper than grief. Grief feels exposed. Grief says, I was hurt. I could not stop it. I wanted something from someone who did not protect it. Analysis says, maybe if we think long enough, we can make sure this never happens again. But no amount of thinking can create a life where pain becomes impossible. That is the secret the mind does not want to accept. Understanding can reduce blindness, but it cannot remove vulnerability. You can learn the pattern. You can see the signs. You can develop boundaries. You can become wiser. And still, to love anything is to risk being hurt by the loss or corruption of it. The obsessive mind does not want wisdom. It wants immunity. It wants to know enough that it will never be humiliated again. It wants to read every signal correctly. It wants to predict every abandonment before it happens. It wants to become so intelligent about pain that pain cannot enter. This is impossible, but the impossibility does not stop the search. It only makes the search endless. There is a difference between deliberate rumination and intrusive rumination. Deliberate rumination is the kind of thinking that may help a person make meaning after a painful event. It can ask useful questions. What did I learn? What boundaries were missing? What pattern do I need to understand? What values do I want to protect next time? Intrusive rumination is different. It arrives without permission. It drags you back into the same scene. It does not ask to heal. It demands to replay. The problem is that intrusive rumination often disguises itself as deliberate rumination. You think you are processing, but after 2 hours, you are not freer. You are more activated. Your body is back in the moment. Your chest is tight. Your jaw is locked. You have checked their profile, reread old messages, imagined arguments, judged yourself, defended them, condemned them, and returned to the same empty place where you began. At some point, you are not searching for the exit. You are redecorating the prison. That sentence sounds harsh, but it describes the trap. The mind builds shelves inside the old pain. It labels every memory. It arranges every contradiction. It keeps the person emotionally present through the act of trying to remove them. Even hatred can become a form of attachment if it keeps your attention tied to the person who hurt you. This is why trying to stop thinking by hating them harder does not always work. Hatred still keeps them central. It still organizes the day around them. It still uses their image as the object around which your nervous system rotates. Sometimes anger is necessary. It can restore dignity. It can show you that something wrong happened. It can break the spell of idealization. But anger that never moves into grief, boundary, or self-return can become another room in the same house. The same is true of longing. Longing can be honest. You may miss real things. A person who hurt you may also have held you, understood you, made you laugh, opened a door in your life, or touched some part of you that had been waiting for years. Healing does not require pretending they were nothing. The mind often cannot let go because it is trying to preserve the good from being contaminated by the harm. It asks, if they hurt me, does that mean the tenderness was fake? If the tenderness was real, does that excuse the harm? This is a terrible equation. The answer may be neither. The tenderness may have been real and still not enough to make the relationship safe. The harm may be real and still not erase every moment that felt human. The mind wants one verdict because one verdict is easier to carry than complexity. Complexity feels dangerous because it does not tell you what to feel. It allows grief and anger in the same room. It allows missing and refusing. It allows love and no contact. It allows the sentence, they mattered and they were not safe. Many people stay obsessed because they believe they must solve the moral status of the person before they can leave emotionally. But sometimes leaving does not require solving them. Sometimes it requires accepting that the full truth is not available, and your life cannot wait for the missing pieces. Freud's idea of repetition compulsion gives a darker way to look at this. He noticed that people can repeat painful patterns, sometimes returning again and again to scenes that resemble earlier wounds. One interpretation is that the mind returns not because it loves pain, but because it is trying to master what once made it helpless. It wants a new ending. It wants to stand in the same fire and not burn. It wants to become powerful in the place where it was powerless. This happens after someone hurts you. In the mind, you replay the conversation, but now you say the perfect sentence. You replay the moment they dismissed you, but now you leave calmly. You replay the betrayal, but now you see it coming. You replay the last message, but now you do not answer. You replay the early sign, but now you trust yourself. Again and again, the mind tries to insert a stronger version of you into the old scene. There is something moving about that. It means the obsession is not only weakness, it is also a desperate form of self-rescue. Some part of you is trying to go back for the version of you who froze, endured, believed, begged, explained, or stayed. It is trying to bring that version out, but the method is flawed. You cannot rescue your past self by forcing your present self to live forever at the scene of the injury. The mind says, just one more replay. Then we will understand. Just one more imagined conversation. Then we will be done. Just one more look at their profile. Then we will accept it. But each return can strengthen the path back. The wound becomes a road. The road becomes familiar. Familiarity begins to feel like truth. This is where trauma bonding can matter, though the term should be used carefully. Not every painful attachment is a trauma bond. Not every person who hurt you was abusive. But when a relationship involves cycles of warmth and harm, closeness and withdrawal, apology and repetition, affection and punishment, the nervous system can become attached to unpredictability itself. Intermittent reinforcement is powerful because the reward does not come every time. It comes just often enough to keep the search alive. A person who is consistently cruel may eventually become easier to leave psychologically because the pattern is clear. But a person who is cruel and then tender, absent, and then intensely present, dismissive, and then apologetic can become far more difficult to release. The mind keeps chasing the good version. It remembers the night they were gentle, the sentence that sounded sincere, the apology that almost repaired everything, the way they looked at you before they became cold again. That good version becomes the drug. The painful version becomes the withdrawal. You are not only attached to the person, you are attached to the possibility of their return to the version that made the pain feel survivable. The mind says, if I can get that version back, then the wound will be undone. If they become kind again, then I was not foolish. If they choose me again, then the humiliation will be erased. But intermittent kindness can be more binding than consistent care, precisely because it keeps the nervous system unfinished. Stable love lets the body settle. Unpredictable love keeps the body searching. It turns attention into a survival tool. It teaches the mind to study tone, timing, mood, silence, and facial expression. It creates addiction, not necessarily to pleasure, but to relief. Relief is not peace. Relief is what you feel when the threat temporarily stops. If you confuse relief with love, you may keep returning to the person who creates the threat because they are also the person who can remove it for a moment. This is one of the cruelest dynamics in human attachment. The wound and the medicine seem to come from the same hand. When someone outside the relationship says, "Why do you still think about them?" they may not understand this. They imagine thought follows value. If you think about someone, they must deserve thought. But the nervous system does not work that cleanly. It thinks about danger. It thinks about unfinished bonds. It thinks about threats to belonging. It thinks about humiliation. It thinks about contradiction. It thinks about the person who became the question. The person who hurt you may have become a symbol, not only of love or loss, but of the moment you lost trust in your own perception. Before them, you may have believed you could sense danger. After them, you review your own memory like a corrupted file. Did I know? Did my body know? Did my friends know? Was I warned? Did I choose not to see, or was there nothing to see yet? This is the betrayal after the betrayal. First, they violate trust. Then, inside you, trust in yourself begins to collapse. That second collapse can be more haunting than the first, because you can remove them from your life, but you cannot remove yourself. If the problem is them, distance may help. If the problem feels like your own judgment, the wound follows you everywhere, so the mind keeps thinking about them as if they hold the answer. But maybe they do not. Maybe they are only standing near the place where your self-trust broke. Maybe the real task is not to understand their every motive, but to understand how to return to yourself after not protecting yourself as quickly as you wish you had. That sentence can be painful. It can sound like blame. It is not. People do not always have the power to leave immediately. They may be confused, dependent, manipulated, hopeful, afraid, financially trapped, socially isolated, emotionally bonded, or simply human. The point is not to condemn the delay. The point is to notice that the obsession may be less about them now and more about the part of you still trapped in the delay. The part that did not know. The part that hoped. The part that explained. The part that waited for the kind version to return. The part that accepted less than it needed, because leaving would have meant admitting what was happening. The part that still feels abandoned in that old moment, looking towards someone who has already turned away. Obsessive thought often tries to save that part by reaching for the person who wounded it. It says, if they explain, we will be released. If they apologize, we will be restored. If they suffer, justice will happen. If they come back, the wound will reverse. If they admit they loved us, the self that trusted them will be vindicated. But this gives them a terrible power. It makes your peace dependent on the moral clarity of someone who may never provide it. It places the key to your nervous system in the hands of the person who taught it to panic. And even if they do apologize, even if they do explain, even if they do return, the deeper repair may still have to happen somewhere they cannot reach, because the wound is no longer only relational. It has become internal. It is now about how you hold the self that was hurt. Do you shame that self for trusting? Do you abandon that self for staying? Do you call that self weak? Do you keep dragging that self back to the old scene as if another viewing will make it less painful? Or do you finally sit beside that self and say, you did not know everything. You wanted love. You were trying to survive with the tools you had. This is where healing becomes less dramatic and more difficult. It is not the fantasy conversation where they finally understand. It is the quieter conversation where you stop using their failure as proof that you are foolish, unworthy, or unsafe inside your own life. It is the slow return of self-trust, not as a promise that you will never be hurt again, but as the belief that if you are hurt, you will not abandon yourself afterward. Many people do not want this kind of healing at first. It feels unsatisfying. It does not punish the other person. It does not make them confess. It does not give you the perfect explanation. It does not restore the original innocence. It asks you to stop waiting for the person who broke the story to become the author of your recovery. That can feel unfair because it is unfair. They caused pain, and you are left with the work. They may sleep easily while you study the wreckage. They may move on while you remain in the room with the unanswered questions. There is no way to make that fair by thinking about it. Rumination often tries to create justice by mental repetition, but the mind cannot sentence another person into accountability. It can only keep you in court. At some point, the case may still be open, but your life cannot remain on the witness stand. This does not mean forgetting. Forgetting is not the goal. Forgetting can even be dangerous if it erases what you needed to learn. The goal is not to make the memory vanish. The goal is to change your relationship to it. A memory can be part of your history without being the place where your attention lives. A person can have hurt you without remaining the center of your inner world. A question can remain unanswered without becoming the altar where you spend your life. The mind will object. It will say, but we still do not know why. But there are missing pieces. But what if there is one detail that changes everything? But what if they cared? But what if they never cared? But what if I was wrong? But what if they are telling the story differently? But what if they think they did nothing wrong? The mind is right about one thing. You may never know all of it. That is the terror. There may be missing pieces forever. The story may remain asymmetrical. You may remember it as a wound while they remember it as a phase, an inconvenience, a misunderstanding, or nothing at all. You may never receive the version of closure that makes the past emotionally clean. But maybe closure is not the moment the story becomes clean. Maybe closure is the moment you stop requiring a clean story in order to leave the room. That does not happen all at once. It happens in small refusals. You refuse to reread the message one more time, not because you do not care, but because it has nothing new to give you. You refuse to build another imaginary argument, not because you forgive, but because your body deserves 1 hour outside the courtroom. You refuse to check whether they are happy without you, not because it would not hurt, but because your pain does not need fresh decoration. You begin to notice the difference between a thought that needs attention and a thought that wants repetition. The first carries information. The second carries a hook. The first may hurt, but it opens into action or grief. The second pulls you back into the same loop and calls the loop loyalty, love, intelligence, or caution. Sometimes the only sentence that helps is simple. This is not new information. This is the wound replaying itself, not to shame the wound, not to silence it violently, just to name it accurately. Because the mind under obsession often loses the ability to tell memory from emergency. It reacts to an old image as if the person is hurting you again in the room. The body tightens, the heart races, the argument restarts. But the event is not happening now. It happened, and now it is being reactivated. That difference is small, but it matters. If it is happening now, you must fight, explain, plead, solve, prove, defend. If it is a memory, you may need to feel, breathe, grieve, orient, return. The person is not here. The phone is in your hand. The room is dark. The old message has not changed. Return to 2:17 in the morning. The screen is still glowing. The conversation is still there. The person has not appeared with the perfect explanation. The old version of them is still unreachable. The hurt is still real. But maybe this time, a different possibility enters the room. Maybe what you are looking for is not in the thread. Maybe it is not in their apology, not in their confession, not in their punishment, not in the proof that they loved you, not in the proof that they never did. Maybe what you are looking for is the place inside yourself where the injury interrupted your trust. And the work is to return there without asking the person who caused the wound to guide you back. This is difficult because the mind wants the story to end where it began, with them. It wants the person who broke the spell to break the second spell too. It wants the hand that wounded to become the hand that heals. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes people take responsibility. Sometimes conversations repair something. But often, waiting for that moment becomes another way of staying attached to the absence. And absence can become a relationship if you feed it enough attention. That is why someone can be gone and still feel present. You keep meeting them in imagined conversations. You keep inviting them into mornings they did not earn. You keep letting their silence speak. You keep making their unknown thoughts more important than your actual life. The body remains oriented toward a person who is not there. The task is not to hate yourself for this. The task is to understand the loyalty beneath it. Some part of you is loyal to the wounded moment. It believes leaving the obsession means abandoning the version of you who was hurt. It believes that if you stop thinking, the harm will become meaningless. It believes that if you move on, they got away with it. It believes memory is justice. But memory is not always justice. Sometimes memory is devotion to a wound that is asking for care, not repetition. To care for the wound may mean admitting what happened without needing to rehearse every detail. It may mean saying, "They hurt me, and that was real. I wanted them to be different, and they were not. I missed signs, or maybe there were no signs I could have understood then. I stayed longer than I now wish I had, and there were reasons. I can learn without turning against the self who survived." That is a different kind of investigation. It is no longer centered on them. It is centered on reality, grief, and return. What did this teach me about my attachment? What did I confuse with love? What did I tolerate because it resembled something old? What part of me still believes inconsistency is intimacy? What boundary must exist now? What would it mean to believe myself sooner next time? These questions are painful, but they lead somewhere. They do not require the other person to become honest. They do not require their nervous system, their maturity, their apology, their memory, their interpretation. They return authority to the place where obsession had removed it. The real reason you cannot stop thinking about someone who hurt you may not be that they are unforgettable. It may be that the injury made you forget where you were. It pulled your attention out of your own body and placed it inside their motives, their silence, their possible regret, their next move, their version of the story. Obsession is attention in exile. Healing is not forcing attention home with violence. It is inviting it back again and again from the place where it keeps waiting for someone else to explain your pain. There may always be a part of you that wants to know. That part is not foolish. It is trying to protect you. It thinks knowledge will prevent repetition. It thinks certainty will prevent humiliation. It thinks the final answer will restore the self that was interrupted. Thank it, maybe, but do not let it run the whole life. There is no final answer that can make betrayal not have happened. There is no perfect theory that makes abandonment painless. There is no diagnosis of the other person that automatically returns your peace. Narcissist, avoidant, coward, liar, wounded child, bad person, good person. All of these may explain something, but none of them can live your life for you after the explanation. At some point, the question changes. Not why were they like that? Not did they care? Not how could they? But what happens to me if I keep returning? What part of my life is being offered to the past? What am I still hoping to receive from someone who may not have the capacity to give it? What would it mean to stop treating their clarity as the entrance to my freedom? These questions do not close the wound beautifully. They widen the present around it. They make room for the possibility that you can carry an unanswered past without belonging to it. Maybe the person who hurt you will never explain. Maybe they will never understand themselves. Maybe they will tell the story in a way that makes you look unstable, dramatic, needy, impossible, too sensitive. Maybe they will move on with ease. Maybe they will miss you and still not change. Maybe they will regret it years from now when it no longer matters. Maybe none of this will ever be known, and still your life remains, not as a consolation prize, as the only place where healing can actually occur. The phone can be put down. Not forever, maybe, not perfectly, but for tonight. The thread can remain unread. The argument can remain unperformed. The profile can remain unchecked. The question can remain unanswered without being obeyed. In the dark room, nothing dramatic happens. No revelation, no sudden peace. Only the small, almost invisible act of not returning to the scene for one more round of pain. The body may still ache. The mind may still reach. The old question may still stand at the edge of the bed. But something in you begins to understand that the answer is not hidden in the person who hurt you. Maybe they are not the unfinished thing. Maybe the unfinished thing is the return to yourself. Maybe you cannot stop thinking about them, not because they are the person who remains unfinished in your life, but because they are the place where your mind keeps trying to rescue the version of you that was left behind in the moment you were hurt.